project meeting. I'm Isabel Min with PlaceWorks. We are consultant assisting California State Parks with this planning effort. I just want to mention that this meeting is being recorded and it will be posted online later after the event at the project website. And all questions and comments will be documented. So we'll try our best to get to all questions tonight, but if we don't, they will be documented and answered and posted on the website. And with that, I will turn it over to Janet Chang, also with the PlaceWorks team, to provide an overview of the Zoom functions for the meeting tonight.
Thanks, Isabel. On the screen, you'll see a screenshot of what your Zoom webinar controls would look like. If you're using a computer, you do have the opportunity to ask questions during the presentation, but we ask that you try to hold your questions if you can until the Q&A part of the meeting. But there is a Q&A button on your control bar at the bottom, and if you click that button, you'll have a pop-up window where you can type your question and send it, and the project team will be able to see that. And if you're experiencing any technical difficulties, we encourage you that you can reach out to us through the chat button. And if you click that, a window will appear on your right-hand side where you can enter a message to the hosts and panelists, and we'll try to help you out. If you're joining by a smartphone, this is what your control panel will look like. The buttons are also at the bottom of the screen, and it will change to a new screen where you can ask a question by clicking that blue button for the Q&A.
Thank you. Good evening. My name is Barry Smith. I'm the district superintendent, acting district superintendent for the Goldfields district. I'd like to say, first and foremost, I appreciate everybody's time this evening. You know, my understanding, we have quite a few people that are on with us tonight, and that's wonderful. Tonight, we're here for the change in use of potential for the change in use for the Browns Ravine Trail. I really understand those that are wanting the change, and I also understand tradition. I understand that this is a difficult decision, and I understand the passion with all of our stakeholders that we have on the line tonight. I think from those that will be presenting tonight and those that work for California State Parks, I think you'll see that same passion in this. You know, I don't take these decisions lightly, and I believe that in any decision we must deliberate those impacts for the next potential 7 generations. So decisions we don't take lightly here, and you'll see a lot of passion in what we're bringing you today. And I hope you see that. And I want to say thank you again for your time. Thank you again for allowing us to do this. And I would first and foremost like to let you know who's presenting this evening. We have Richard Preston LeMay, who's the Folsom Sector Superintendent, Jim Michaels, Senior Park and Rec Specialist on the district, and Jason Spann, who is Associate Landscape Architect. Other state parks in attendance with us tonight is Alex Stell, with our Strategic Planning Division Chief, and Nathan Harper, who was our District Maintenance Chief, Devin Swartward, who is our Interpreter 2 on the district, Steve Hilton, Cultural Resource Supervisor, Megan Sullivan, our Senior Environmental Scientist, and Eric Taylor, who is an Interpreter 1, and Noel Breitenbach, who is Associate Park and Rec Specialist. Another question that might need to be answered is, who is PlaceWorks? And PlaceWorks is here tonight to help us facilitate the meeting. So we thank them for that. And presenting, or people that will be with PlaceWorks this evening, is Isabel Min, Isby Fleischman, Janet Chang, and Ricardo Poses. I'd like to turn this over to Isby. Thank you.
Thank you, Barry. As Barry mentioned, PlaceWorks is just assisting state parks with facilitating this meeting. We have the opportunity to work with state parks on many projects, and this is tonight. However, we are just assisting with the meeting and not the overall project. Just a little background: PlaceWorks is a multidisciplinary planning and design firm that has a lot of experience in park, trail, and open space planning. But if we can go to the next slide. Before we dive into the presentations tonight, what we would really like to take a minute to do is to hear a little bit more about who is attending tonight, to hear about all of you. In a moment, you're going to see a Zoom poll pop up on your screen, and we're going to ask you to choose one answer from each of the 3 questions. You'll need to scroll down to see all of the questions. The first question is, how far do you live from Folsom Lake SRA? The next question is, how do you most often use the trails within the parks? And I know that many of you probably have multiple ways that you use the trail. So tonight we just want to ask you to choose the one that you most often do. And lastly, how often do you use Browns Ravine Trail in particular? I'm going to take a moment to let everyone answer. All right, I still see a lot of answers coming in. Okay, I think more and more answers. All right, I think we can go ahead and close the poll and look at the results together. Okay, I think, can everyone see the results on their screen? All right, I'm hoping you can see the results. So as far as what we just learned, it looks like many people live, oh, we had a request to reopen poll. We will come back to this. This is just giving a snapshot of who is here tonight. So about 90% answered, and most people live within a mile or at least under 5 miles. We don't have anyone participating that lives between 25 and 50, but we do have a couple people more than 50 miles away tonight. So a lot of local participants. And then we asked, how do you most often use the trails? Looks like 61% of the people that responded, mountain biking was their primary use. And next, about 19% are horse riders. And then we had hikers and walkers and trail runners, and one road biker here tonight. And lastly, how often do you use Browns Ravine Trail? A lot of people here, it looks like, use it weekly or monthly, almost every day. So I think that we'll have a lot of familiarity with the trails tonight. All right, well, thank you so much for sharing. We are looking forward to hearing more from all of you tonight. The agenda does include multiple points. We will have opportunities for questions and answers. Again, we'll be using the Q&A tool. And we'll also have comments at the end of the presentation. We have a lot of time saved for hearing your comments. Given that there's a lot of content that we'll be sharing this evening, however, I do encourage you to hold your questions in the Q&A if possible until the Q&A sessions, just because your questions may be answered by the presentations. And with that, I'm going to go ahead and pass it to Rich and get started.
Great, thanks, Isby, and thank you everybody for your participation in the poll. That was really great information. Good evening. My name is Rich Preston LeMay, and I'm the Folsom Sector Superintendent, and we're all really looking forward to hearing your input tonight on this decision. The purpose of the meeting this evening is to share the district's change in use team's recommendation for the Browns Ravine Trail, to provide background and content for the recommendation, and to solicit public questions and comments. Our agenda this evening will include the meeting purpose, which we just went over, and a summary of the project. We'll be providing a brief background and history of the Browns Ravine change in use. We will present the change in use evaluation, the findings, and the team's recommendation for the proposed change in use. We'll then pause to answer questions about the evaluation and the findings, and then we'll proceed with the presentation of the trail modifications that have been identified by the team, highlight some other management measures that could be implemented, and then we'll pause again to respond to questions about those modifications and management measures. We will then review the proposed project schedule, provide a summary of the public comments that we received thus far, and finally wrap up with an opportunity for additional questions and public comment. A couple of reminders. We're going to kind of hit you with this a few times as we move along, but a couple Zoom reminders for this evening. Please remember to use the chat feature if you need technical assistance. Use the question and answer feature to ask questions and make comments. And we will try to respond to as many questions live as possible tonight. All questions and comments will be documented, and more comprehensive summary of the questions, answers, and comments will be made available on the project website. Next slide, please. The project area under consideration for this change in use is the Browns Ravine Trail, which is the trail from Browns Ravine to Old Salmon Falls on the South Fork of the American River. This change in use does not include the trails in the Monte Vista area of the park. Those trails will be evaluated separately as part of the Roads and Trails Management Plan. Next slide, please. Next, Jason and Jim will provide some background and context for this project.
Great, thanks, Rich. Good evening, everyone. My name is Jason Spann, and I'm an associate landscape architect and planner with California State Parks. And one of my responsibilities is to consult with districts on the department's trail change and use process. So I'm going to just provide a very brief summary of the change and use process, which was developed in 2013 to provide a more objective way of determining if change in use should occur on trails within the department. The process is initiated through a request for a change in use. The remainder of the brown colored events across the top of the flow chart represent the evaluation done by a multidisciplinary group of state park staff, leading to a recommendation to the district superintendent. The evaluation and recommendation consist of an inventory to document existing conditions along the trail, completion of a 7-point evaluation to determine if the change in use is appropriate, and a team recommendation to either reject, put on hold, approve under existing conditions, approve with conditions such as design and management modifications, or if more than one trail is requested in a park, call for the development of a road and trail management plan. The next step is to solicit public and stakeholder input on the recommendation. The district superintendent would then make a decision after considering the evaluation and public input. If approved, the next step would be to implement the change in use, which may require environmental review and obtaining necessary permits. Finally, initiation of an adaptive use management process to monitor and determine if the change in use objectives are being met, and if not, implement strategies to correct. I'm now going to turn it over to Jim, who's going to provide some background and history on the change in use associated with the Browns Ravine Trail. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Jason. Again, I'm Jim Michaels, Senior Park and Recreation Specialist on the Goldfields District, and I want to provide a bit of the background on the history of looking at a change in use designation on the Browns Ravine Trail. There was likely interest in opening the trail to bike use prior to 2000, but the first organized effort to consider changing the use designation on the trail was the Folsom Lake Trail Advisory Group, or FTAG. Group was formed in June of 2000 to find solutions to address the increased demand for trails and to reduce trail user conflicts. FTAG included equestrian, mountain bike, runner, and youth trail user representatives, and the group was led and facilitated by several state park staff. Group looked at a variety of project options, but settled on a pilot project to open the Browns Ravine Trail to multi-use, allowing bikes for a 1-year period, and to monitor and assess the results. The group walked the trail a number of times and identified the modifications needed in order to add bikes to the trail. 2 public meetings were held regarding the proposed pilot. In 2001, FTAG recommended to the district superintendent at the time to move forward with implementing the pilot. The district superintendent decided to defer a decision on the proposed pilot project to the Folsom Lake SRA general plan, which was just being initiated at that time. There was an incorrect assumption that the general plan would make specific trail use designation decisions. All of this was prior to the department's formalized change in use process that we're currently using. There have been numerous subsequent requests to the district to consider the Browns Ravine Trail for a change in use. It took a number of years to complete the Folsom Lake SRA general plan, but it was approved in October of 2009 and finalized in 2010. While the plan has many goals and guidelines related to the development and management of the trails, the plan did not make specific trail use designation decisions. Following the completion of the general plan, the district initiated a road and trail management plan, or RTMP, for the park unit in 2012. This plan will include individual trail use designation decisions along with other proposals regarding the road and trail system. The department has engaged PlaceWorks last summer to assist with the completion of the RTMP. We held a virtual public meeting on October 26th and have a schedule to complete the plan by next winter. You can find more information about the RTMP and how to get engaged with that plan on the project webpage. Next slide. While we are actively working on completing the road trail management plan, the district has decided to move forward with a decision on the change in use for the Browns Ravine Trail, separate from, but parallel with the development of the RTMP. The reasons for assessing this trail as a standalone change in use project include, as we discussed, there's a long history of requests and evaluation of a change in use for this trail going back more than 20 years. To show good faith to those past efforts, we want to move forward with this change in use as an individual project. The trail has favorable site conditions with relatively gentle terrain, good sight lines for the most part, and durable soils. There are multi-use trail segments on either end of the trail, and the change in use will provide connectivity for bikes. We believe the trail is a good candidate for a change in use, and we have completed the individual change in use evaluation for the trail. As we have also been working on the RTMP, we've had an opportunity to consider this change in use in the context of the entire park unit trail system and are comfortable with moving forward with this individual change in use decision for the Browns Ravine Trail. The standalone change in use decision will allow the district to move forward with implementing this change in use ahead of the RTMP. Next slide. In 2015, a multidisciplinary team of state park staff walked the trail and completed the initial field evaluation. That team included an environmental scientist, an archaeologist, a state park ranger, the park and recreation specialist, who was the district trail specialist at the time, and the senior park and rec specialist, who was the district planner and the trails coordinator at the time. Field evaluation was completed by this team, and the team made the initial recommendation regarding the change in use. The Goldfields District Superintendent will make the final decision on this change in use, and as he introduced himself, Barry is currently the acting district superintendent. Next slide. Next, we want to review the evaluation for the Browns Ravine Trail that was completed by this district team, which is the primary basis for the change in use. Next slide. The change in use evaluation form, I'm sorry, could you go back, Janet? Thank you. The change in use evaluation form asks a series of questions regarding the physical characteristics, condition, and use of the trail in 7 areas. And you can see the 7 areas there: existing conditions, compatibility with existing uses, facilities and services, circulation patterns, trail safety, sustainability, effects on resources, and effects on trail operations and maintenance. There are findings made in 6 of these areas, and as we've noted, the change in use team makes a recommendation. The change in use evaluation form completed for the Browns Ravine Trail is on the project webpage and available for the public to review. I'm going to highlight some of the key information and findings from each of these sections of the evaluation form. Next slide. The first section of the form is a brief assessment of the existing conditions. The current trail use designation allows pedestrian and equestrian use. The trail is well used, but does not get the high levels of use as other trails within the state recreation area, such as trails in the Granite Bay area. The trail appears to be more lightly used from New York Creek to Old Salmon Falls. The trail is regularly used illegally by cyclists, and this is not a justification for the change in use, but an observation, and it's one of the questions in the change in use evaluation form. The map on this slide may be a bit hard to see, but it is an erosion severity map for the Browns Ravine Trail, which combines a number of data from the trail condition inventory and provides an assessment of the level of erosion along the trail. Where the trail is shown as a green line indicates slight erosion severity, and the yellow indicates moderate erosion severity. The majority of the trail has slight erosion severity. Next slide. Compare that map to this erosion severity map of the trails on the other side of the lake in the Granite Bay area, where erosion severity is moderate to high, indicated by the yellow and orange color of the trail. The Browns Ravine Trail has durable soils that can withstand additional use with regular maintenance. Next slide. The finding of the changing use team is that bike use on this trail would be compatible with existing visitor uses and facilities. Some of the considerations from the evaluation regarding compatibility include, initially, we believe there's adequate parking and access at Browns Ravine and Old Salmon Falls trailheads. There's a room and opportunity to create additional and potentially separate trailhead parking and amenities for bikes at Browns Ravine. As we've noted, there's a long history of a repeated request to allow bike use on this trail, which I discussed earlier. Part of our consideration in the evaluation, including looking at the trail miles currently available to different uses. This table on the slide provides an overview of the trail miles by allowed use currently within the Folsom Lake SRA trail system. I just want to note that the 56 miles of unpaved multi-use trails includes dirt or gravel service roads that are used as trails, such as the tops of some of the dikes around the reservoir. With trail modifications and management measures, we don't anticipate significant levels of user conflict, which again is based on a number of items already discussed, including the relatively gentle topography and open terrain along much of the trail and the lower levels of use on this trail. Next slide. The team's finding is that implementation of the change in use will enhance circulation for cyclists. There are multi-use trails where bikes are permitted on either end of the Browns Ravine Trail, the Mormon Island Cove Trail on the south and the Sweetwater Trail on the north end. Implementing the change in use would allow cyclists to have uninterrupted trail riding opportunities along the length of the South Fork arm of Folsom Lake and to be able to connect to the Darrington and South Fork trails. Opening this opportunity to bikes could help relieve congestion and high levels of use on other trails, such as in the Granite Bay area. Next slide. Regarding the effects of the change in use on trail safety, the team's finding was that implementation of the change in use with modifications can maintain trail safety. The terrain and vegetation are sufficiently open in most areas to allow users to step off the trail for passing. There are exceptions, including the section of trail from Higgins Point to Old Salmon Falls. One of the proposed trail modifications is to widen this segment of trail. For the most part, standard maintenance brushing is sufficient to provide adequate sight lines, but there are a few areas where additional brushing is needed. We plan to retain some of the rocky textured sections of trail to help slow bike speeds. Management measures that will be taken to help provide for trail safety include occasional trail patrols by ranger staff, trail etiquette and safety signing, and trail safety education and outreach by interpretive staff, such as pop-ups at the trailheads and roving along the trail. There have been complaints about bike use on this trail, primarily from adjacent neighbors, but there have been few documented safety incidents. Rich is going to discuss trail accidents and incidents in more detail now. Next slide.
Okay, in response to some of the comments that we received about trail safety, we felt it was important to examine the data that we have on trail accidents. The data you see on this slide was extracted from our public safety database and summarizes trail accidents from the past 10 years. This data is from accidents that our peace officers or lifeguards responded to and documented in a public safety report. The pie charts represent trail accidents for the entire Folsom Lake trail system for the past 10 years. These accidents are on both the paved and natural surface trails. As you can see, there were 48 total reported horse accidents, approximately 75% of which were solo rider accidents. 4 of the accidents involved a bicycle. The remaining accidents involved wildlife, dogs, pedestrians, or other horses. There were a total of 260 bike accidents, nearly 80% of which were solo rider accidents. The remaining accidents involved other cyclists, pedestrians, and 1 incident with a one-wheel. It should also be noted that approximately half of the total bike accidents occurred on the paved trail and half were on the natural surface trails. When we looked at just Browns Ravine Trail for that same 10-year period, there were 5 total accidents reported. Those included 3 solo bike accidents, 1 horse versus pedestrian accident, and 1 solo horse accident. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Jim to continue with the remaining change in use evaluation points.
Thanks, Rich. With regards to trail sustainability, the team's finding was that with trail modifications, the trail will be sustainable after implementing the change in use. As we've already noted, the soils along the trail are very durable. The clay and rock content provides that durable surface. There are sections of minor entrenchment, rills and ruts along the trail in places, but not the severe entrenchment seen on other trails within the state recreation area. The trail is currently generally in sustainable condition. The proposed modifications include reroutes, armored crossings, and other modifications that will help maintain trail sustainability. We will discuss the proposed modifications later in the presentation. Next slide. Regarding the effects of the change in use on natural and cultural resources, the team's finding was that with trail modifications and using the standard project conditions, implementing the change in use will not significantly impact natural or cultural resources. There are historic mining and cultural features along the trail. There's also elderberry along the trail, which is the host plant of the federally protected Valley elderberry longhorn beetle. Standard project conditions were developed as part of the change in use programmatic EIR the department prepared in 2012. Utilizing the applicable standard project conditions from the PEIR and other best management practices will help avoid significant impacts to resources. An example of these standard project conditions is things such as avoiding trail work during the bird nesting season, or if we need to do so, conducting the appropriate nesting surveys. We are getting public input on the proposed trail modifications, and once the modifications are finalized, we will complete an environmental review for the proposed trail modifications. Next slide. Lastly, on the evaluation, with regards to the effects of the change in use on trail operations and maintenance, the team found that implementing the change in use will not significantly increase operation and maintenance workload. Additional trail structures proposed as part of the trail modifications, such as trail bridges, will require additional maintenance, but these structures will protect resources. And some of the modifications will actually help reduce maintenance needs in the long run. Regular trail maintenance can be performed by the district trail crew and utilizing volunteers. And we realize there's substantial interest from volunteers in assisting with trail maintenance. Trail patrols, trail signing, and trail safety education efforts will require additional staff time, but these will not be a significant impact. Next slide. Taking all of the above into consideration, the recommendation of the change in use evaluation team is to approve the change in use with trail modifications, adding bikes as an allowed use on the Browns Ravine Trail. Next, I think we're going to take some questions regarding the evaluation findings. Next slide.
Great, thank you, Jim. And we're going to take about 5 minutes to answer questions that you may have about the evaluation and findings or about the process itself. We have been receiving a lot of questions and also some comments as well. I just want to let you know at this time, we're going to be focusing on the questions. And we will hold these comments and be saving them, and we will be able to share some or all of the comments during the comment session at the end of the meeting. Isabel, do you want to do the first question?
Sure. Well, I think a couple questions are similar in nature, which is, and I believe, Jason, you might be attempting to type an answer, but since a couple folks have asked, the question is about opening the trail prior to modifications, and is that possible?
Yeah, no, good question. During the evaluation, it was determined that, the modifications were going to be needed. And I know one of the questions were, well, it's bikes are currently using it now, and unauthorized use, and it's sustainable. Why not just leave it that way? Well, we do anticipate more use on the trail and more tires on the ground, more potential erosion. And although this is a state recreation area, which does allow for more active forms of recreation, state parks is still legally obligated to protect the resources, and particularly when we're doing projects like these. So the team did feel it was necessary to implement the modifications prior to opening. However, they are somewhat staged in. There's some high priority things we want to get done prior to opening, and then there's things that we've recommended that can be done after use is allowed. So we know if it is approved, we definitely be working on getting it open as soon as possible, but we do feel the modifications are necessary. Jim, I don't know if you have any other comment on that.
Yeah, we're going to talk about the modifications further in the presentation, but I will say we are interested in public comment and input on the proposed modifications, and there could be changes to those modifications after we consider that public input.
Great. All right, I have a couple of other more specific questions. One is a clarification, a question of whether the elderberry beetle is still considered endangered. And another question about how accidents are reported.
I believe the Valley elderberry longhorn beetle still is listed, and Megan, if you have anything you want to add to that, feel free to jump in.
It is listed. There was a proposal to delist in 2014, but that was withdrawn because there wasn't enough information on it. So it is still federally listed as a threatened species.
And the question about how accidents are reported, typically these are accidents that are reported through the 911 system and are routed to our state parks dispatch, to which our rangers or lifeguards respond. I think we understand that there are other trail encounters that occur that level doesn't happen, or certain accidents go unreported, but this was the data that we had available to share.
Great. Isabel, do you want to share another question? I think we're a little ahead of schedule, so we can do another couple minutes.
Sure. There are a couple I'm trying to summarize because we're getting a lot of questions about some of the safety data, which I think Rich did some clarifying. A question here is, why is the Browns Ravine Trail being considered to be open to mountain bikes on the Darrington Trail? I'm trying to clarify. The Darrington Trail has decreased so significantly. If the usage on Darrington has decreased. So I think Jim.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any data that the use of the Darrington Trail has decreased. It definitely fluctuates seasonally, but I think we went over some of the reasons for the change in use and the connectivity that it would provide bikes. There's multi-use trails on either end of it, and it would provide connectivity the length of the South Fork arm of Folsom Lake. So if I understand the question, that's.
Okay, we have a question pertaining to improvements. Do trailhead improvements also include, I know you talked about some of the trail modifications, but do they include better access for horse trailer parking?
They could. We haven't determined all of the trailhead improvements yet. We're definitely interested in hearing from the public about improvements they would like to see. I think I noted that part of our assessment of the existing conditions is that there's room at Browns Ravine in particular to develop additional trailhead parking and potentially to separate uses at the trailhead a bit. And quite often that's a technique on multi-use trails to separate the uses at the trailhead, and there's the possibility of doing that at Browns Ravine, but we haven't identified all of the trailhead improvements, and we're interested in the public's input on that.
All right, here's another question. It says several neighborhoods connect to the trail and families with small children walk on the trail to the lake regularly. So are there plans to monitor and control the speed of the trail? Will there be a speed limit, for instance?
Rich, do you want to speak to the speed limit?
Yeah, we don't have a speed limit, and a speed limit on the trails is something that's incredibly difficult for us to try to enforce. And we understand that there are going to be folks out there hiking with small children and other users, but I think through the modifications that Jim described, that will help with some of the sight lines and assist with the safety out there.
Great, and I think we have a lot of other questions here and we'll have more time to get to them over the course of the evening. But we do have questions from several questions about volunteering, either volunteer for trail maintenance or for trail safety patrol. And I think if could give us an overview of plans for or potential for volunteers, that would be great.
Yeah, we're definitely interested in engaging volunteers. We have a revitalized district trail crew, and they're already reaching out to volunteers to assist with trail maintenance. And we do have a mounted assistance unit trail patrol and equestrian trail patrol that's been a longtime group in the state recreation area. And we're finalizing, Rich might be able to provide an update on this. We're finalizing an agreement with bike patrol, volunteer bike patrol group. Part of the management measures that we want to implement as part of the change in use is to utilize our interpretive staff to have a greater presence along the trail, doing pop-up events at the trailheads to provide information about trail safety and to do some roving along the trail and just to have a greater presence, along with occasional state park ranger patrols.
Great, thank you. So we do have a lot more questions, and again, we're going to do our best to get to as many as we can this evening, but we are going to keep the presentation going, and we'll have several more opportunities to get to all these questions. And State Parks is also providing some, responding to some questions in writing, and you should be able to see the responses in your Q&A window. All right, I believe I'm going to pass it over to Jim next.
Thanks, Isme. Next, we're going to review the proposed trail modifications for the change in use project. Next slide. The rationale for the proposed trail modifications for the change in use is what physical changes to the trail are needed to provide for trail sustainability and trail safety. The modifications include a number of things, including reroutes, construction of several new trail bridges and armored crossings, eliminating unsustainable parallel trails, reconstruction of some sections of trail, and installing drainage dips and constructing puncheons or causeway sections across some of the wet areas along the trail. Routine maintenance needs to be performed along the entire trail, and this would include brushing and removing the slough and berm on the tread. This work needs to be completed regardless of the change in use, as I'm sure some of you have noticed that this trail maintenance work has begun. Next slide. Currently, the proposed modifications fall into two categories. High priority modifications are those needed to protect a watercourse, wetland area, or to provide for trail safety. And these include repair, replacement, or construction of drainage structures, installation of a couple trail bridges, and the causeway or puncheons across wet areas that I mentioned. Also includes trail widening where needed, and brushing and other sightline improvements. As Jason noted, these items are to be completed prior to implementing the change in use. The medium priority modifications are those modifications not directly connected to a watercourse, and these things might include drainage dips or trail reconstruction in areas between drainages. And the medium priority modifications are to be completed 3 to 5 years following the implementation of the change in use. Next slide. Part of our strategy regarding the trail modifications is to leave existing, what we're calling endurance riding or technical challenge features. And these are segments of trail that are rocky or with uneven tread, sometimes a bit steeper, that we've determined are not an erosion or trail safety problem. Retaining some of these more textured sections of trail will help slow bikes. Next slide. There's an 18-page map set on the project webpage showing the proposed trail modifications in detail. The public can review these maps and provide comments on the proposed modifications. The next couple of slides provide some examples of the maps and highlight a few of the types of proposed modifications. Next slide. In that map set, this is trail modification map number 8. And this is the area near the end of Lake Hills Drive. A key modification in this area is a long reroute to move the trail away from the adjacent houses and to provide a more sustainable alignment. The existing trail along the property line is the yellow line on this map, and the purple line is the proposed reroute following the topography and closer to the shoreline. This map also includes some of the proposed causeway or puncheon structures across wet areas. Next slide. This is trail modification map number 17 in that map set. And this shows a segment of trail from Higgins Point east towards Old Salmon Falls. Proposed modifications in this section include widening the trail tread to improve the ability for trail users to pass one another. This section from Higgins Point all the way to Old Salmon Falls is particularly narrow, and we felt it was important to widen the tread a bit in this area. Additionally, there's brushing to improve sight distances in this area. Next slide. In addition to the physical modifications of the trail, other management measures to be implemented as part of the change in use include trailhead signage, including messages regarding trail safety and trail etiquette, trail patrols, either by state park staff or potentially using our volunteer patrol groups that we've discussed. Pop-up events and trail roving by interpretive staff to provide greater state park presence along the trail. Social media messaging. We're also considering a 1-year moratorium on any new special events on the trail in order to see how implementation of the change in use works, and to reassess this moratorium after the first year of the change in use. Finally, as Jason noted earlier, part of the department's change in use process is to use an adaptive management approach to monitor the trail conditions, user conflicts, and safety incidents, and to take additional management actions as appropriate. Next slide. And I think this is Isby.
Great, thank you. All right, thank you for getting all these questions in. We have a lot of conversation or just questions and also some comments falling through as well. We're going to take another 5 minutes. Actually, I think we can go to 6:55 to answer some more of these questions. We're going to focus on questions that are about trail modifications and management measures. And again, we'll try to return to the others as soon as we can. Isabel, do you want to do the first question?
Sure. This is related, well, this is a trail modification specific, but how will you evaluate the displacement of hikers, equestrians by the increased number of bikes? So I think this is a question regarding how to monitor, changes in use patterns once the Browns Reveal Trail is open to bikes.
It's a good question. We are aware that the change in use alters the experience for trail users. We haven't specifically identified how we might look at how implementing the change in use changes who uses the trail. We could do that through trail user surveys. We are separately investigating different types of trail count techniques. So I would say that's a good item for us to consider further.
Okay.
Right, there's a couple questions about earlier on about whether a parallel trail would be considered. So having a parallel bike and then pedestrian or equestrian.
Yeah, we know we've gotten already a number of comments from the public about that idea. And the team that evaluated the change in use, really going back nearly 20 years, there were different alternatives that the FTAG group looked at. And then the evaluation team also is aware that there are different alternatives to providing access for bikes, but the proposal we landed on is to implement a change in use along this trail. As we noted, the trail is along relatively gentle terrain, and a lot of it, like this photo right here, is not everywhere, but a lot of the trail is open, and it's fairly easy to move off the trail to allow users to pass along much of the trail. So we understand the concept of providing a parallel trail, but the proposal and recommendation is to implement a change in use on this particular trail.
Great. I just want to take a second to make sure or to remind people to use the Q&A and chat functions respectfully. There is some back and forth conversation. And it would be great if you could keep your comments and questions focused on the topics, and we'll save back and forth conversation for another time. Let's see. Isabel, if you have another question, feel free.
Will the work on the trail include cleaning up dead brush and limbing of trees to 9 feet to reduce the risk of wildfires?
The department has standards for brushing of trails, and is part of the change in use. Really, I mean, just part of routine trail maintenance is brushing. And I believe our standard is 8 feet wide, 4 feet from the center line of the trail. And as part of that brushing, we should be scattering the brush out of sight or chipping. And so that's what our standard is for brushing. It's 8 feet wide, 4 feet from the center line of the trail. As I noted, some of the trail modifications, there are areas where we might do additional brushing because there are line of sight challenges in particular areas. And I don't know if Megan has anything she wants to add about the fuel reduction.
Thanks, Jim. Ladder fuels, which is usually when we're lifting, the canopy up, is not what we do in our natural areas. That's more of a defensible space type of guideline, more closer to structural facility type things. In our native trail areas where there are not structures, we are looking at a different type of prescription for fuel reduction. And we will be continuing to increase the pace and scale of fuel reduction within a lot of areas of the park, but not to the standards that you would see at defensible space, because there's different goals with each of those types of abilities, but it would still end up reducing wildfire risk.
Right. Okay, we've had a couple questions about electric bikes and e-bikes as well, and what the policy would be for e-bikes on the trail.
So I can take that one, Jim. Our current policy under our trail use superintendent's order is that we do permit class 1 only e-bikes on natural surface trails that are open to bicycles. We permit class 1 and class 2 e-bike use on our paved trails. We do not permit any class 3 e-bikes on our trails at all. So if this change in use were to be approved, class 1 e-bikes would be permitted on the Browns Ravine Trail.
Right. Okay. So we're sorting through all the numerous
I've got a
questions.
question here. The question about widening the entire trail to meet the state parks trail handbook standard, requiring a multi-use trail to be a minimum of 48 inches wide.
Yeah, I can take that. The Trails Handbook specifies a minimum width of 36 inches. So I think a lot of the trail currently is that now, and we are looking at widening some locations to help better meet that standard. So once again, it is 36 inches in the Trails Handbook.
Okay. How about will organized racing be prohibited? And I think the concern behind that is the trail becoming a racetrack.
I think what I mentioned in the management measures is that we are considering a moratorium on special events such as races for the first year of the change in use. Any new special events. There are a couple events that occur on the trail currently, but we are considering a moratorium on special events, which would include races for 1 year, and then to assess after that year how the change in use is going and whether or not we feel like we can open the trail to additional special events.
Right. And another process question, there is a request for clarity on whether the proposed change in use would trigger an EIR.
We haven't determined the level of CEQA that the change in use will require. We are gathering public input on the trail modifications. And once we consider all of that input, we'll finalize what the trail modifications are going to be, and we'll complete an environmental review, an initial study on those modifications that we feel are required for the change in use. And we'll determine the level of CEQA compliance and documentation following that initial environmental review. The department, we did mention that the department prepared a programmatic EIR regarding this change in use process back in 2012, 2013. It's the kind of the range of CEQA compliance and documentation could range from filing a notice of determination under that programmatic EIR all the way to having to do a full EIR to be determined.
Great. Isabel, do you want to share one more question before we move on?
I think we're at time. I'm looking through to see if there's any specific. Well, there's a question, where can we make comments about the trail modifications? So I think we did say this evening that people are putting their comments in the Q&A here this evening, and at the end we'll be able to go through the comments, but you can submit them, and we'll give the website and the email address at the end where you can submit comments about the proposed trail modifications that have been discussed this evening.
Great, and I think Rich is going to move on from here and talk about the project schedule.
Yeah, thanks, Isby. I'm sure everybody's kind of wondering what the project schedule is going to look like for the proposed change in use. The change in use request for the Browns Ravine Trail was initially received in 2014. The change in use team conducted their field evaluations in 2015 and 2016 and prepared their draft recommendations then. In 2021, the trail modification mapping was completed by our team. And the final change in use decision by the district superintendent is expected later this year, probably in the next several months. Our district resources staff are prepared to begin the environmental review for the proposed trail modifications and complete applications for any necessary permits for the proposed work. If approved, environmental work could begin late this year and into early next year. Again, if approved, implementation of the trail modifications could start by fall of this year and could be completed sometime in 2024. If approved, as Jim mentioned earlier, monitoring of the trail and implementation of adaptive management strategies will be an ongoing process after that change. Next slide, please. All right, we are reaching the end of our presentation, and we're at the point where we're going to open it up to some additional questions and comments. But first, we wanted to provide a brief summary of the comments we've heard so far. Next slide, please. State Parks has already received substantial public comment on the change in use proposal, both in support and in opposition. We have read each of the comments, and this list presents the major themes of those comments. So those opposed include open the trail to bikes will lead to additional unauthorized trail development and resource damage. The speed and lack of etiquette by some bikers will make the trail unsafe for other users. State Parks has not enforced trail rules in the past and is not likely to do so in the future. Trail conditions are not consistent with multi-use, narrow and blind corners. Bikes will change the trail experience. There's a need for trail opportunities for pedestrians and equestrians without bikes. And from those in support, bike use has grown tremendously and continues to grow. There is a need for more biking opportunities. Implementing the change in use will provide needed connection to other bike and multi-use trails. Trail conditions are suitable for multi-use, gentle grades, good sight lines, and durable soils. Open trails to bikes prior to completing all modifications and use volunteers to assist with trail work. Now, please keep in mind that our consideration of public comment is not just a matter of counting votes for and against the change in use, but rather the decision will be based on the substance of the comments received, as well as site-specific conditions of the trails, trail sustainability, and safety. And a more comprehensive summary of the comments will be available on the project website later on. Now I'm going to turn it back over to Isby, who will help facilitate the question and comment period. Thank you.
Great, thank you. I think, Rich, thank you for covering the logistics again. I want to let everyone know we do have a lot of questions and comments, but we have some time to make it through. We are going to be trying, there are some general themes we're seeing in comments, so we'll do our best to summarize both common comments and common questions. And I think, Isabel, do you want to start us off?
Yeah, I'm not going to read. I think folks can see that there are 103 open comments or questions. So as we mentioned earlier, we will be documenting these. I think some of these overlap with some of the answered questions. So when we move them into the answered, it's just so we can, hit any new topics that are coming up this evening. I think folks can scroll and see through the comments that consistent with what Rich just presented, there's just a wide range of comments in support and comments and concerns regarding the change in use. I think we can see a lot of requests for some additional safety information. I think we got some information today, so there's some follow-up on safety issues. Numerous comments about opening up the trail prior to doing the modification, which we touched on and Jason addressed a little bit earlier in the evening. Quite a lot of comments specifically supporting the use by cycling and concerns with the safety issues that may be caused by opening the trail to bikes. So I think a lot of the comments are in line with the summary that we have. As Rich mentioned, there are a lot of support and concern comments. We do have a few additional questions that I'd like to get to and field about maybe etiquette and some of the rules or maybe enforcement. So I'll start with one here about, will pedestrians and horses have the right of way on the trail or in the new, with the change in use?
Yeah, so consistent with trail etiquette almost anywhere, horses generally have the right of way over cyclists and pedestrians. It's kind of that triangular system that we've all seen. But I think we found that doesn't always work the best. And I think communication between the user groups out on the trail is probably the best solution, is, people talking to one another, announcing their presence, and just working together out on the trail to make it a safe place for everyone.
Great. We have another specific question that asks, will bikes be allowed? Will bikes also be allowed on the other Falcon Crest loop?
I think we covered that in the beginning part of the presentation, but this change in use only addresses the Browns Ravine Trail, and that is from the Browns Ravine Trailhead to the Old Salmon Falls. The Monte Vista Trail system is not part of this change in use and will be evaluated as part of the larger RTMP.
I have another one here about process. And the question is, what, I guess, since this is a public comment forum, what would it take to change the current CIU? And there is another question as well about what, within the process, could this decision ever be changed back?
I'll start with that. So the department's process is that this multidisciplinary team of state park staff do the initial evaluation and make the findings, which I summarized, and provide a recommendation. And that's just a recommendation on the change in use. The district superintendent is the person who will make the final decision on whether to approve the change in use. And part of the process is to consider public comment prior to making that final decision. I think we laid that out, but yeah, that's the process. And then as far as reversing the decision, as Jason outlined, the department's approach with change in use is an adaptive management approach. And we want to monitor conditions and implement additional management measures if needed. I suppose ultimately, if there were real problems that outweighed the benefits of the change in use, yes, we could reverse the decision ultimately. But I'm sure we would be looking to, if the change in use is approved, we would be looking at what additional modifications to the trail would help solve problems, what additional management measures engaging with the different user groups would solve problems.
Okay,
There's-
yeah, I wanted to mention there are still a number of questions, I think, after Rich had addressed it regarding the speed limits and the accident statistics. So Rich, I don't know if you have been able to see some of those comments. What are the accident statistics along the Granite Bay area as a comparison? And I believe you presented the Browns Ravine, but that you do also have park-wide data on safety and accidents. Is that correct? And there are a few more questions regarding safety pinch points and the consideration of speed limits, and a comment about folks thinking that there is a 15-mile-per-hour speed limit for bikes in state parks.
Part of our trail safety order does have a 15-mile-an-hour speed limit addressed in there, but like I mentioned earlier, that's something that's almost impossible for us to enforce. And even if we wrote tickets, it may be almost impossible for us to prosecute in court. That's just the unfortunate side of our justice system and the way it's set up. I'm sorry, Isabel, can you give me the rest of that question again, please?
Sure. I think it's about speed limits, considering new regulations for speed limits, and increased pinch points, considering doing things like increased pinch points for trail safety.
Yeah, and I'm going to let Jim handle some of those, but yeah, part of the evaluation team was to utilize some of the textured portions of the trail that already exist and leave those in place, which would help with speed, as well as potentially having pinch points and other features that help slow bicycle speed.
Yeah, just to reiterate, I think it's actually, if people looked at the evaluation form for the trail that's on the webpage, I think we do mention pinch points as one of the potential modifications. I just really provided a summary and not all of the potential modifications, but there are a couple locations where potentially we could install pinch points to help control speed.
Okay.
I think the other piece of that, Isabel, I'm sorry, it's just coming back to me, was about the accident statistics for Granite Bay area. I did not specifically pull those out. The information that we provided on the slide was for the entire Folsom Lake State Recreation Area on the top portion of those slides in the pie charts. And then because we were talking specifically about the trail tonight, that I pulled out the Browns Ravine Trail information specifically for this presentation. But we haven't looked at breaking down the trail safety information or accident data by trail segment across the sector.
Okay.
Thank you.
We had a question about parking as well. And that Falcon Crest is often overflowing, and where will additional cars park?
I think Jim covered a little bit of that. Falcon Crest is a very small area. There's not a whole lot of room for us to expand there because we're abutting private property up there. So in that area, there's probably not a whole lot of area for us to expand. But Jim mentioned earlier in the presentation that there are some possibilities of expanding trailhead parking and providing additional facilities on the Browns Ravine side.
Thank you. Looks like we have quite a few suggestions or comments about shared use days, having different days for equestrians and bicycles. That just came in the last 10 minutes or so, I think, after we discussed it. Could you say a little bit more about the potential for shared use days?
Yeah, in addition to looking at things like separate parallel trails, the idea of, I'm assuming the comment is about having alternate days for different types of uses.
Yes.
And we know
Yes.
that is implemented on other trails, other places. The evaluation team considered some of those alternatives and will certainly open to hearing public comment on alternatives like that. It can be a challenge to enforce the alternate days, as it's a challenge to enforce many of the trail rules. And so we have considered that, but what the proposal and recommendation of the district team that evaluated the trail is to implement a change in use on the trail with the trail modifications.
Thanks. Kind of follow on to that. There's a question about what trails in Folsom Lake State Recreation Area have you found that mountain bikes and horses can coexist? So maybe some of the successful examples. Maybe in Folsom Lake State Recreation Area or other areas.
There are trails along Lake Natoma on the north side in the, well, rather on the south side, there's a multi-use trail along Lake Natoma that's multi-use. I don't know that we hear about lots of conflicts and problems on that multi-use trail. The Sweetwater Trail is a multi-use trail. And the trail on the other end of the Browns Ravine Trail from the Mormon Island Auxiliary Dam to Browns Ravine is also multi-use. And I don't know if Rich wants to expand on this, but I'm not aware that we hear of lots of conflicts or problems with different users on those trails.
Yeah, I'm not aware of any major conflicts on those trails. I do think that they are probably lesser used by the equestrians. But yeah, unfortunately, at Folsom, it seems like there is a lot of conflict, or it sounds like there's a lot of conflict. But I also see in the comments and hear through the email comments that we received that there's also a lot of people cooperating and doing using the trails together.
Go ahead, Izzy.
And so we have a question from a dog walker who has experienced bikers telling him that they shouldn't have their dogs on the trail. And their question is, will the trail be available to dog walkers? And how will the trail be labeled as dog friendly, if so?
I don't know that we will specifically label every trail as open to dogs. We do have the areas that are open to dogs listed on our website, and at Folsom, all of our trails are open to dogs on leashes no more than 6 feet long.
I kind of want to summarize. There are probably 3 or 4 questions here about horse manure on the trail, and I feel like since there's so many comments about it that we should have an opportunity to answer or to address that, and requiring equestrians to clean up after horses. So just because it's a common question in a small group, there are several questions in a row, whether that's something that's required now or could be, or Any thoughts on that?
It's not something we currently require. It's not something that we considered as part of the change in use. Certainly open to hearing, if people have suggestions regarding that and want to provide that comment, we can certainly consider it. And obviously, enforcing something like that could be a challenge. And yeah.
Thanks, Jim.
Okay. Here's a different question, but are there any ambitions to have the trail completely circumnavigate Folsom Lake? It's a complete loop around Folsom Lake.
That's probably a comment for our road and trail management plan. We, in our general plan, we did identify the goal of having a complete loop around Folsom Lake. I would say whoever made that comment, get engaged in the road and trail management plan. There's a web page devoted to that project, and that's where that concept, that idea would best be articulated.
Right.
Here's a question. I'm wondering if the modifications proposed are included in the current budget for trail maintenance, and if not, how will it be funded?
So the trail modifications are above and beyond routine trail maintenance. And as I mentioned, we need to do routine maintenance on that trail regardless of the additional modifications. And the district would fund the trail modifications that are required for the change in use. And I believe we would have the funding available to implement the modifications.
Thank you. Isby, do you have one? I have another.
Yeah. We're getting a lot of questions still about speed, but we also had one. Can you reiterate the reasons that the CIU was not approved in 2002? And the writer says the letters that went out to the community members noted that the primary reason was for the delay was staff shortages, and reiterated that she supported the CIU. I think if there's any other discussion there, it'd be helpful.
Yeah, that comment is actually correct. There were two reasons for not moving forward, and one was the district superintendent's concern at the time with the additional staff resources that implementing the change in use would require. But also, I know the district superintendent, and I believe it was part of the letters, was that she wanted to defer the decision to the general plan, which was just being initiated at the time. But the staffing and funding and resources were a concern as well.
Great. Isabel, do you have one that's ready?
Yes. How about, here's a question. How about instead of addressing the current trails, state parks considering new trails? Considering new trail. I think this was asked in one way a little earlier regarding a parallel trail. But this one mentions specifically north of Rattlesnake Point, not Rattlesnake Bar, all the way to Olmsted. Maybe that's more of a comment, but I don't know if Jim, you want to?
Yeah, as with the loop around Folsom Lake, the road and trail management plan will consider new trails, and our general plan, which we're looking at closely as part of developing the road and trail plan, identifies trail corridors as well. But that comment about a parallel trail on the North Fork arm, something we're certainly aware of, and I direct that person to get engaged with the road trail management plan and to take a look at the website for that plan.
Okay. So there's a question about funding and whether there is a commitment, if the district has a commitment to fund the trail modifications.
We do believe we have the funding and resources to implement the trail modifications. I don't know if Rich wants to speak further to that. We also have I think he may still be on, our district maintenance chief, Nathan Harper. And I don't know if either Rich or Nathan have more to add to that.
Yeah, I think I would just say that we do now have a district maintenance trail team. So a lot of those things can be taken care of in-house, whereas before we had to contract them out. So it's much easier and more cost effective for that team to go out and implement some of these things. And, I think as I talked about earlier on the schedule, this is not something that's going to happen overnight. It's going to be several years implementing these changes and making the improvements to the trails that would be needed for the change in use.
There was a request for a manual. I think it relates to trail etiquette, which I think State Parks has. And I think maybe in our questions, we can make a link available to any documents. It says, can you make available the regulations or rules that users are expected to follow?
Yeah, our posted order for trail use is posted on our website for the Folsom Lake State Recreation Area, as are all of our other regulations that are specific to Folsom.
Is the question regarding trail etiquette regulations?
Well, yeah, it refers, I think both etiquette and regulations.
Okay. Because obviously trail etiquette, there's no like regulations or codes on trail etiquette. That's just something that as trail users and land managers, we promote. Rich, if I'm correct, there's really no regulations to enforce trail etiquette, correct?
Correct. But we do have our trail use posted order, which designates which uses are permitted on which trails. And that's on our website.
We have a question. We've had several more questions about volunteer involvement in trail improvements. And one that specifically asks, why is the use and access of mechanized equipment necessary given the availability of volunteers? And Rich, I think you talked about this, the volunteer potential a little bit earlier, but it sounds like some clarification on why the volunteers can't be used for all of the improvements would be helpful.
Yeah, I think we are definitely trying to expand our involvement with volunteers. Jim talked a little bit about that earlier, and he mentioned that we are working on an agreement with another volunteer group that I believe I saw in the comments is currently a bicycle volunteer group for the Sacramento County area, and we're trying to get them under an agreement to probably initially assist us with the paved trails and then expand that eventually onto the dirt trails. We have relationship with Fat Track and other groups that have been out and have been assisting us with trail work, and we're trying to build those relationships further and provide additional opportunities. But it also, using the mechanized equipment also can be a lot more cost effective and do things quicker.
Yeah, I would just add, I see the comments about the mechanized equipment and eliminating some of the technical features. And, I think that's something we'll want to work with our trail crew staff and with Nathan. It is in places much more efficient to use the mechanized equipment. there may be locations where, in order to preserve some of these technical features, we may need to do some of the work with hand crews. And I'm sure we'd like to work with the various groups that are interested in assisting.
There are a few questions. Well, there was the questions about widening the trail, and I think folks are seeking a clarification about the correct minimum width of 36 or 48 inches. And the comment that goes with it is that even 36 is not possible in some places on the trail.
Yeah, I saw a couple of those comments, and one person did point out to me that we have an inconsistency in one of our appendices where it wasn't changed to match the body of the text. So Chapter 9 of the handbook specifies 36-inch minimum width, but in the appendices, we did not correctly update that, and we need to. So the minimum width is 36 inches. Thanks for pointing that out. I appreciate that. We're going to make that correction. Whether or not you can get 36 inches along the entire trail, well, we could look more into that. I mean, a lot of times, you may have very short distances where you can't get 36 inches. That doesn't really create any sort of hazard. We'll be looking at those locations. I mean, the width standards are really about, allowing for, passing of individuals. Almost more importantly, though, is the ability for users to get off the trail in a safe area to let, to yield to other users. And so we will look a little bit more into that 36-inch width and where we have it and where we don't.
Great.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think we, go ahead, Isby.
Oh, I was going to move to another question. We have a question about if Fat Track would be able to install bike bell stations at key locations along the trail.
I know I've been to other state parks around the state, and the bell program is in effect there, and seems to work fairly well in most parks. I think the other user groups and the non-bikers seem to like that. So I know that that is a management consideration.
And just to add on to that, we do have some signs up already around the park that Fat Track worked with a Boy Scout group as a Eagle Scout project, and those are out in the Granite Bay area, Darrington Trail, and a few other locations. So yeah, we would definitely be open to expanding that program.
Great.
Thank you. I think there are a couple of questions regarding timeline, and I know it was covered in the presentation, but I think if folks didn't catch it, I'm just wondering if Jim, you might, or Rich, you might do a little big picture about the opening, the timing again for the CIU once the approval process, or if the approval process moves forward, and then the timing for modifications and then eventually opening. Because I think there's still a lot of question about that, the timing. We could maybe pull up the slides again that addressed it.
Yeah, sure. So I think what we talked about earlier was that the trail modification mapping was completed in 2021. We expect that Barry, our acting district superintendent, will be making this decision sometime within the next several months of this year. And then our district resources staff is prepared to begin their evaluation, their environmental review of the trail modifications, and complete any applications for permits to allow this work. And that would be completed later this year and into 2023. Implementation of those modifications then could start as soon as late this year and would potentially run through 2024 and on. I think Jason mentioned that some of these things would be 5, 6, 7 years down the road to complete some of the lower priority changes to the trail, but to get it open, we would expect that to be done sometime late 2023 or 2024.
Great. And related to that, Jim, we have some questions with people wanting more information and background on the decision. Can you let us know what will be available on the website as far as the background for the analysis and the decisions?
Yeah, right now we do have the change in use evaluation form posted, which includes the recommendation. We're going to be considering all the public comment, and I would suspect we'll have a summary of the public comment and maybe possibly even some responses, but definitely we'll have some sort of summarization of the comment we've received. And then we will post, as I indicated earlier, we haven't determined the level of CEQA compliance or documentation yet. And we will post those documents on the web page and with the state clearinghouse as required. Yeah.
Great. And one more follow-up to that, where there's a couple of questions about what prompted this change and who requested the change in use.
So really the request for, or the idea for a change in use is, as I went over in the presentation, has gone back more than 20 years, back to 2000. We also held several stakeholder meetings in 2014. There were several letters requesting change in use on a number of trails, including the Browns Ravine Trail. It's taken a long time to complete the general plan, and it's taken a long time to complete the road and trail plan, and we're now on a path to complete those things. But to show good faith to the past efforts to analyze this trail, we decided that we wanted to move forward with this change in use separate from and parallel to the road and trail management plan. And I think I articulated all of those things in the presentation.
Great.
I have two questions that I pulled that are pretty similar about some of the previous trail modifications that were made in the Granite Bay area. So one comment is the gravel trail modification in the Granite Bay area modifications were downright dangerous with the flattening of the trail and use of loose gravel. Will this be avoided in Browns Ravine? And then another comment, will the trail widening contemplated between Higgins Point and OSF include the same type of decomposed granite that was placed around Granite Bay in spring of 2020? That was an unwelcome addition. So I think concern about those improvements and how future improvements might be similar or different.
I'll take a stab at that. So I don't think we anticipate, I think the improvements that were made in the Granite Bay area, where we did import some DG, I don't think we're going to need to do that on the Browns Ravine Trail. The soils are pretty durable out there. And if there is any fill required anywhere, I think our hope is that we can utilize the native material. So I don't anticipate that we'll be importing a lot of material. And as I indicated in the presentation, we do want to retain some of the rocky or textured sections of trail. And we will work with our trail crew to, we have identified those areas for them, but we'll work with them further to work through that.
Great. Thanks, Jim. Ms. B, do you have a next one?
I am working on that right now. I just want to note there definitely, as Isabel said earlier, a lot of comments of support. And then also comments of concern for equestrians and hikers being pushed off of the trail, and concern about what resources exist for those user groups. I think that's been spoken to a little bit, but if Jim or Jason or Rich, if any of you want to say more about the equestrian opportunities, that would be helpful.
I think one of the slides had the trail mileage by allowed use, and there are certainly still many miles of equestrian pedestrian only trails still within the state recreation area, even if we did implement this change in use. And the road trail management plan is where we will look at the entirety of the trail system and consider other change in use requests in the context of the entire system. And I think we recognize that a multi-use trail experience is different than a limited use trail experience. And we'll be considering all of that as part of the road trail management plan. Would say that because we've been working on the road trail management plan, we have been able to look at Browns Ravine in the context of the rest of the trail system. And as I mentioned earlier, we feel like this trail is a really good candidate for a change in use.
And go ahead.
A question here about the timing of the assessment work. Have these assessments been completed in a post-COVID environment with a substantial increase in recreational use? I think some was before, but some was during the more recent couple of years.
The evaluation was initially done, and the field work by the change in use team was done in 2015. But we have gone out and taken a harder look at the trail modifications over the past year, and staff have been out there a number of times over the past year.
Thanks, Jim.
Excellent. And we still have quite a few questions about speed, and one that was specific to signage and what kind of signage was planned or would be considered along the trail and at the trailheads for regulations such as speed.
I think most of the trailhead signing that we're going to consider and have been talking about will be talking about etiquette and everyone sort of sharing the trail. Obviously, the allowable uses will be posted at the trailheads. But again, I think it's kind of a broader question and input for the roads and trails management plan as we're developing that trailhead signage. I do not anticipate posting speed limit signs all over the trail or on the trail or along the trail. But yeah, that we are still developing what those trail signs will look like. And that will be part of what we're doing with the larger roads and trails management plan.
There are a couple of questions about the adequacy of parking. I think Isby, you had asked one, but this is specific to equestrian and hiker only trails, and whether other equestrian trails specifically, have enough trailer parking. The comment is that equestrians are having an increasingly difficult time being able to access trails due to limited parking. So I don't know if that's data or maybe anecdotally, any comments on availability of parking.
So this project is just looking at the change in use for the Browns Ravine Trail. Initially, we feel like there's adequate parking. We realize that it's constrained at Old Salmon Falls. However, we anticipate a lot of people will access this trail at Browns Ravine. And we have room at Browns Ravine to develop additional parking as needed.
Great.
Thank you.
And I think we have some time right now, and we've gone through most of the questions. There's still some out there. I'm going to start interspersing some comments, and we'll try to mix in some of the pro and con comments in our remaining time together. So this will be a great new resource to get more families out, getting real exercise, more kids outside riding with friends and family rather than video games without needing to have the resources to have a horse will be a value added for the community. More access for the less privileged will be a bonus, and the trail with concern doesn't make sense due to the fact that the wider trails create a chance for more mountain bike speed. People and horses have figured out how to pass without improvements already. So that was one comment, and I'll turn it over to Isabel.
Sure. I think a number of comments have come in about, appreciating the forum and the information, that there was a lot of, this was a good public forum. Let me read a couple comments about supporting opening the trail, support the common sense trail use for non-motorized methods. Bikers, a number of the comments are referring to the conflict between bikers, and that volunteering and positive solutions are needed for all. Support for opening the trail. I'm a trail runner. I support opening the trail. A lot of comments about being able to share the trail. Others about conserving the natural beauty, keeping the trail the same. So to balance out support for opening and changing it. Also comments about concern for the natural resources and not making the trail wider. Keep it the same, open the trail. So you can see what State Parks has been receiving, the wide range of comments. And of course, all of these will be summarized, and then outstanding questions that we didn't get to this evening will be answered on the website. I think at the bottom here, a few last comments are coming in with questions. I don't know if we have time for a few more. Isn't this trail considered multi-use already? Hikers and equestrians. I think this is similar to a question we had earlier in the evening. Why are modifications needed if the trail is currently multi-use? And I think to clarify, the multi-use is the consideration to add bicycle use to a trail that is currently hiker equestrian.
Yeah, so State Parks does not consider the current trail multi-use. In state parks, hikers are allowed everywhere on trails. So when you add another use to it, such as Browns Ravine, if you add equestrians to it, that thing gets categorized as an equestrian trail because hikers are allowed everywhere. And so it only becomes multi-use in state parks when all three uses are added. I know that's different for other agencies, but state parks multi-use is hiker, bike, and equestrian.
Thanks, Jason.
Okay.
Jason, Jim, Rich, I know you can see, so we've read quite a number of the comments. I want to give you the opportunity, if you've seen something that you feel we haven't asked that you might want to touch on before we conclude here, but we've put 73 questions in the answered box. Among the comments and questions left open, the majority are comments again, and if there are some additional questions, we will be summarizing answers to them and putting them on the website.
I did notice a couple of questions / comments regarding the 2012 user conflict study. And this person was wanting to daylight the fact that occurrences or incidents don't happen very often on trails. I have to admit, I have not looked at that user study for a long time, so I can't speak to it. But I do want to let everybody know that it is on the park's website under the change in use process. And the 2012 user conflict study was in appendices to that. So you can go to our website, type in California Trail Change in Use Process, and you'll be able to see that. Note that State Parks is going through some issues right now on trying to make their content online compliant, ADA compliant. So you may have to actually request the document get emailed to you, but it's a pretty simple process. So I would encourage those of you who are interested in looking at that study to do so.
Great, thank you. Anyone else on the State Parks team before we wrap up this evening? And any other final questions or comments? We can look down at the bottom in the Q&A. Do want to close. There are, I know it can be a little difficult topic, but that there are quite a number of comments in support of mutual respect, collaboration, volunteering on helping make this project successful or make improvements to the trail successful and trail etiquette improvements. So thank you for all those positive ideas, and we'll definitely summarize those as well. And with that, I think I will turn it over to Rich, who's our final slide.
I got it.
Sorry, I think it's
Sure.
very,
No worries.
apologies.
Thank you, Isabel. Again, just like I said before when we started, I just want to say thank you. I try to speak really candidly. The video conferencing is not easy for me. I'd rather be talking to you face to face in a room and conversing. But thank you for everybody's time and your input. And I read through all the comments and I see a lot of positive out there, and I think that's good. I think we have a really an opportunity here. And, this department, California State Parks, has gone through a lot of change in the last few years. A lot of good, some bad. Some of that good is we've been able to stand up our core programs. And anybody that's talked to me I've talked about the change. We've been able to bring in more cultural resources and environmental resources, and we have interpreters now at Folsom where we never did before, and we have a trails team that it can actually get out and work on these trails and throughout the district. These are great things, and these core programs. I always tell people that no core program is above the other. We all work together. When one core program is dictating for others, then we're out of balance. And it's very important for us to be communicating and working together. And that's some of the positive change that I've been seeing throughout the district. We have the ability to do things and to work with people. And again, I talk about that passion because I see that passion from all of you this evening. And I thank you for that. I do challenge everyone in order to make things work, in order to improve our trails, we all have to be working together. We have to be communicating. We can't be at odds with one another. We have to work together. And we can't, I always say we can't be in our own silos. You know, I hear the need for more trail safety, and I completely agree with you. We can improve that through interpretation, using our law enforcement officers, working together, putting that message out there. I completely agree with what I was reading this evening. So again, thank you for, that's all that's been said this evening. Again, this is a big decision, but I truly believe that if we work together, we can accomplish anything. And we need to be on the same page with what we're doing. And I think we can, like I always tell folks, sky's the limit. So thank you for everyone's time tonight. Jen, Rich, and Jason, and Placeworks. Thank you for all your time on this and orchestrating this and putting this all together. I truly appreciate it. We have a wonderful opportunity here today, not only with the potential for the change in use, but also our road and trails management plan. So I tried to talk enough, so if people wanted to make sure that they get their questions in by January 30th, 31st, the website is there. If you want to learn more about the change in use, the website is there. And also the road and trails management plan, you can find more information on the page as well. But again, it's my pleasure. And I know it was a pleasure of all those that presented this evening. So thank you. I look forward to working with you and getting to know some of you. So thank you again, and we'll be talking soon.
Thanks, everyone.